Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
When I was growing up, I had what I thought was the coolest uncle ever. He was the fun one who always brought us treats, took us on adventures, and seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with us kids. My dad and this uncle were brothers, and my dad was always so happy about how involved his brother wanted to be in our lives. That all changed one day when I was 7 years old. I was in my room packing my bag because my uncle was supposed to take me on a special trip to what he called an amazing place. My dad had been cheerful all morning, but then I heard him let out this horrifying scream. The sound of him ripping open our front door and slamming it was so violent that it knocked a picture off the wall. That was the last time I saw my dad for 9 months. My mom had fortunately won some money in the lottery recently, so we were okay financially. Whenever I asked about Dad, she'd just smile and tell me that Daddy was away for a little while because he was looking after me and my siblings. Strangely, my uncle stopped coming around too. We spotted him in town a few times, but he'd literally run away when my mom saw me waving at him. When Dad finally came home, we had this big celebration with food and cake. A week later, he sat all us kids down for a talk. He explained that our uncle wouldn't be coming around anymore, telling us he was a bad person. He warned us that if our uncle ever tried to talk to us, we should ignore him and find him or mom immediately. We all agreed because we trusted our dad completely. About a year later, when I was 9, I was waiting outside school for my parents to pick me up. That's when I saw my uncle standing there, grinning. He came up to me and told me he was there to take me for a ride. I told him what my dad had said, that I wasn't supposed to talk to him because he was a bad person. His face changed into something scary for a moment. He tried to convince me that it was all good now and that my parents had changed their mind. He reached for my hand, but suddenly my dad appeared out of nowhere and punched him square in the face. I saw blood fly as my uncle fell. The last thing I saw was my uncle running away, with my dad chasing after him. Dad came back a while later and hugged me tight. He told my mom to take me home and said he'd see us later. I somehow knew I wouldn't see him for a while again. Sure enough, it took 2 weeks before he came back. Years passed, and I never knew the whole truth until recently, when my dad finally told me over drinks. The real story was much darker than I could have imagined. That day, when I was 7, my uncle's wife had called my dad in a panic. She'd found disturbing photos of children under their bed. She was terrified to go to the police because my uncle was physically abusive toward her. My dad had stormed over there and found my uncle screaming at his wife. He beat my uncle badly, but when the police came, my uncle managed to hide the evidence. My dad was arrested for assault. My uncle tried to kidnap me from school that day as revenge, knowing people wouldn't believe my dad's warnings about him. They just saw him as the angry brother with assault charges. But my dad knew exactly where my uncle would run to, his house, to destroy any new evidence he'd collected. My dad drove there and confronted my aunt again. He demanded to know if she was going to lie again, after what my uncle had just tried to do to her nephew. She finally broke down and helped, bringing out more evidence. My dad told her to leave and call the police in an hour. When my uncle showed up, my dad was waiting. He tackled him through the front door, subdued him, and held him until police arrived. This time, with actual evidence, the truth came out. My uncle got 20 years in prison but died after serving 15. Nobody in our family mourned him. When my dad told me all this recently, I could see the guilt in his eyes. He told me that while he didn't regret what he did, he wished he'd handled it differently so I was never put in danger. I told him I was proud of him and that I loved him. Only now, as an adult, do I understand why they waited so long to tell me the truth. How could a child possibly process something like that? I can barely handle it now. My dad spent almost a year in prison, and later, another 2 weeks, all to protect us. He sacrificed his freedom to keep us safe from someone who was supposed to be family. Looking back, I realize every time he went away, he was actually taking the fall to protect us all. I've been working as a police officer at this international airport for about 7 years now. Started right after finishing my time in the military where I served as military police. The transition felt natural. Both jobs require a level head and the ability to handle high-stress situations. Most days at the airport are pretty routine, but sometimes you get these entitled people who think the world revolves around them. This story is about one of those days. It was one rough evening. A nasty storm had just passed through, causing all sorts of chaos with the flights. One airline in particular was having major computer issues because of it. Their entire system was down, affecting flights across the country. At their ticket counter, there were about 60 people waiting in line to get rebooked. Despite the frustrating situation, most people were being surprisingly understanding. I was doing my regular patrol when I got the call about a disturbance at the ticket counter. Here's how it went down. The ticket agent politely told the man that he would need to wait in line like everyone else. The businessman responded arrogantly, demanding to know if the agent knew who he was and bragging about being a priority passenger and A-listed. The guy had just barged to the front of the line and literally shoved aside an elderly woman in a wheelchair who was being helped at the counter. Real class act. The ticket agent tried to be understanding, acknowledging his frustration while still insisting he needed to wait his turn. The businessman responded by demanding to see a manager immediately. Other passengers started speaking up at this point. One passenger called out that they were all waiting there, while another told him to get to the back of the line. The businessman exploded at them, telling them all to shut up and yelling about how they didn't understand the importance of his meeting. He started getting in people's faces, screaming about his status and how he was more important than everyone else. That's when the manager showed up. The manager gave him two simple options: either go to the back of the line or leave the airport. The businessman responded with more arrogance, asking if the manager knew who he was and threatening the manager's job. This is when things got interesting. This tall guy must have been at least 6'5", built like a brick wall, stepped forward from the line. He told the businessman to focus on him instead of yelling at everyone else. The businessman suddenly got real quiet but kept muttering under his breath. That's when I arrived with my partner. I asked what the problem was. The businessman immediately started lying, claiming the airline employees had been extremely rude and unprofessional and that the tall man had threatened him. He insisted on pressing charges. When I told him we had camera footage of the entire incident and multiple witnesses, he became even more belligerent, claiming everyone was lying and that the footage must be fake. He then tried to intimidate us by demanding our badge numbers and supervisor's contact information. I've heard this song and dance before. People like him always try to throw around imaginary weight when they're caught being awful. The manager told us they were placing him on their no-fly list and banning him from flying with them. The businessman protested, insisting he was a valued customer. I told him he needed to leave the premises immediately. He refused, declaring he wasn't going anywhere and that we couldn't make him leave. I gave him his final warning, explaining that he could either leave voluntarily or be arrested for trespassing. He responded with a dare, boasting about owning the Lakeview Hotel downtown and claiming to be friends with the mayor. So we arrested him. Turns out his important meeting was just a regional hotel owners conference where he was hoping to convince some bigger chains to partner with his single, mediocre hotel. Instead, he spent the night in jail. The conference organizers were actually on that same flight. They saw the whole thing. Last I heard, not only did he miss his conference, but word spread quickly through the local hospitality industry about his behavior. His hotel's bookings took a serious hit after that. The elderly woman turned out to be the mother of a state senator. The businessman got charged with assault on top of the trespassing charge. Sometimes, karma works fast. I heard this story from my parents, and knowing everyone involved, I can say with certainty that it happened exactly like this. My mom has always been the type of person who treats everyone with respect until they give her a reason not to. She's particularly protective of her own mother, who's the sweetest person you'll ever meet. My dad's parents, on the other hand, have always been difficult. They're the type who think they're better than everyone else, especially my dad's mom. She goes to church every Sunday and makes sure everyone knows about it, but her actions rarely match her words. My mom usually tried to keep things civil with him, mostly for my dad's sake. After all, they were still his parents, and he was trying his best to take care of them. My parents even paid their phone bill every month. One day, my mom and dad's mom got into some petty argument. Mom says she can't even remember what it was about now, but my dad's mom got really worked up about it. She started yelling about how ridiculous the situation was and declared she wouldn't stand for it. She stormed out of the house in a huff. About an hour later, my dad got a call from one of his employees at his business. Apparently, his dad, who worked there, was going around bad-mouthing my mom's mother to anyone who would listen. Not just complaining, mind you, but using the kind of language that would make a sailor blush. My dad was confused at first. How did his dad even know about the argument? When he confronted his mom about it, she put on her holiest face. She swore to God that she hadn't said anything to his father and claimed she hadn't even spoken to him that day. She even made the sign of the cross while saying it. My dad wanted to believe her, but something felt off. That's when my mom had an idea. Remember those phone bills they were paying? She pulled up the records. And there it was. A call from Dad's mom to Dad's dad, just minutes after she stormed out. My mom was livid. Not because they were talking behind her back. She couldn't care less about that. But the fact that they were dragging her mother into this, saying such vile things about someone who wasn't even involved, that crossed a line. She waited for the perfect moment to expose them. The next big family gathering, when everyone was there, aunts, uncles, cousins, the works. The topic of the argument came up again. Dad's mom immediately started defending herself, insisting she never spoke to Dad about it. Dad's dad joined in, claiming he had no idea what anyone was talking about and denied saying anything about anyone. That's when my mom pulled out her laptop. She challenged Dad's mom about her earlier statement, asking if she really wanted to stick to her story about swearing to God that she hadn't talked to him. Then Mom showed them what she had found. She opened the phone records and turned the screen around. The timestamp was right there, clear as day. Mom called everyone's attention to the screen, pointing out how Dad's mom, who claimed to be such a devout Catholic, had sworn to God while lying straight to her son's face. The color drained from both their faces. They started stammering, trying to come up with excuses, but Mom wasn't having it. She called them out not only for lying to their own son, but for having the audacity to drag her mother into this. Someone who had never done anything to either of them. Not a single person in the room tried to defend them. All their usual enablers just sat there in uncomfortable silence. My aunts and uncles just stared at the phone records, then at their parents, then back at the records. Dad's mom tried to stammer out some kind of excuse, but Mom cut her off, telling her bluntly that the only thing she didn't mean to do was get caught. After that, both of them had to apologize. Not just to my mom and dad, but to my mom's mother too. And from that day forward, they had to start paying their own phone bill. Funny how having proof in black and white can change someone's tune real quick. The whole incident actually led to some positive changes in the family dynamic. The other relatives started calling out my dad's parents more often when they tried to pull their usual stunts. Sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to the bullies to break their power over everyone else. I've always been the designated babysitter in our family since I turned 16. Now at 18, I pretty much handle all the kid-watching duties when the adults are busy. It's not just because I'm the oldest cousin. I actually enjoy spending time with the little ones, and I've gotten pretty good at managing their various personalities and quirks. My 7-year-old brother has earned himself the nickname Shadow because he follows me everywhere I go. Most teens would find this annoying, but I actually think it's kinda sweet. He looks up to me and I try my best to be a good role model for him. One weekend I was watching Shadow along with our 2 young cousins, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, who we playfully call Thing 1 and Thing 2. The day had started out pretty normal. I decided to put on the movie Cocoon, thinking it would be something all of them could enjoy. Shadow and Thing 1 were both into scary movies, and I figured Cocoon wasn't too intense for little Thing 2. When we settled in to watch, I noticed Shadow and Thing 1 exchanging mischievous looks. They started whispering to each other, and I knew they were up to something. Sure enough, they began trying to scare Thing 2 throughout the movie. I told them to cut it out and that what they were doing wasn't nice. Shadow defended their actions, saying they were just playing, and Thing 1 chimed in about how funny it was. Thing 2 pleaded with them to stop, saying she didn't like it. I tried reasoning with them, asking how they would feel if someone bigger than them kept trying to scare them, but they wouldn't listen. They kept jumping out at Thing 2 from behind the couch, making scary noises, and telling her the aliens from the movie were going to get her. Poor Thing 2 was getting more and more upset despite my repeated warnings to the boys. Finally, I announced that the movie was over and we needed to get Thing 1 and Thing 2 back to Grandma's house. Shadow protested, insisting they were just having fun, but I told him to get his shoes on because we needed to drop them off and then take Dune home. Shadow, true to his nickname, agreed to come along for the ride. After dropping our cousins at Grandma's house, which was literally 2 houses down, we headed across town to take my brother's girlfriend, Dune, home. That's when I had an idea. Near the beginning of Dune's Road, there was this empty field. I pulled in, turned off the car, and gave Dune a subtle look to play along. We sat there in silence for about 5 minutes before Shadow started getting antsy. He asked why we were sitting there, and I simply replied that we were waiting. A few more minutes passed, and he asked again what we were waiting for. I just told him he'd see. After another few minutes of tense silence, Shadow demanded to know what we were doing there. That's when I launched into my story. I told him that Dune and I weren't from Earth, that we were sent here many years ago to find a human child, to bring back to our planet, and that we had chosen him. Shadow immediately accused us of lying. Dune played along perfectly, confirming my story and adding that the ship should arrive any minute to take us home. I could see Shadow's eyes go wide as genuine fear started to build. He insisted we weren't really aliens and begged us to stop. I continued the act, telling him we'd been watching him grow up, making sure he was the right one, and that now it was time. That's when Shadow started crying, real tears streaming down his face. Through his sobs, he begged to go home, saying he didn't want to go to another planet. I used this moment to point out how being scared wasn't very fun, comparing it to how Thing 2 felt when he and Thing 1 kept trying to scare her during the movie. Shadow immediately apologized, promising between sniffles that he wouldn't do it again, and pleading with us not to take him to another planet. I pressed him, asking if he was sure, reminding him that Thing 2 was a lot younger than him, and what he did wasn't very nice. He frantically promised again and again that he'd never scare her. Finally, I started the car and turned on the lights. I explained that we weren't really aliens, but I wanted him to understand how it feels when someone bigger tries to scare you. I asked him if it was fun, but I already knew the answer. The drive to drop off Dune was quiet, with Shadow sniffling in the back seat. On the way home, he spoke up again, telling me that what I did was really mean. I agreed with him, but pointed out the difference. I did it once to teach him a lesson, while he was doing it repeatedly just to be mean. He apologized again, and I acknowledged his apology, explaining that sometimes the best way to learn something is to experience it yourself. True to his word, Shadow never tried to scare Thing 2 again. In fact, the next time we all got together, he was actually protective of her when Thing 1 tried to start the scary business again. I guess sometimes you need a taste of your own medicine to understand why your behavior isn't okay. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.